There was once a man in American history who was considered the greatest smuggler. He was very clever. He took every step thoughtfully. He had altered his flights in such a way that even government radar could not detect him. Air patrols were sent to stop him, but surveillance jets could not catch up with him. The place where his plane landed was so unique that government agencies had never even seen such a place. People still say he was not just a smuggler. He was the genius of that trade. This is the story of the era when the most cunning and dangerous drug smugglers used to operate on American soil. So let's start today's true crime story. But before starting, if you like our true crime series, then like the video. Do give your feedback in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. With your support, we can bring better cases to you. In the early 1980s, President Ronald Reagan of America launched a direct war against drugs. He said, "Our fight is against drugs and we will win this fight at all costs." Meanwhile, Colombian cartels wanted to get their goods to America at any cost. At that time, the Medellin cartel had established its routes from South America to Miami and the Caribbean. Islands like the Normans had become their private airports. Planes used to land there every hour. Pablo Escobar used to treat his pilots like VIPs. Alcohol, women, and full security. Among those pilots was Rick Little, whose aircraft was expert at landing on runways hidden amid dense jungles. But cartels themselves never took the risk of being caught. So they began hiring American pilots. During the investigation, agencies began to see a pattern. Florida had by then become the biggest entry point. Those who were part of this network did not look like ordinary people. Expensive clothes, heavy gold chains, big watches. Their style resembled characters from a TV show like Miami Vice. A former customs officer said such people practically announced themselves by saying, "Look, I am a drug smuggler." Customs and the DEA began to crack down on such people. More agents were deployed in Florida. High-tech radar was installed on smuggling routes. Within a few years, the government's surveillance planes had become flying radars in the sky. Every suspicious plane and every unfamiliar boat came under watch. A trap was laid along the coastline so that no one could hide on land or sea. A former DEA officer said 80% of arrests began there when a smuggler came close to the American shore. Soon the effect of this crackdown became visible. Many drug rings were exposed. Tons of drugs were seized. Millions of dollars in illegal earnings were confiscated, and smugglers' planes were seen crashing from the sky. Around Miami and the Bahamas, the only things visible on land were crashed planes. But among all these was a smuggler who kept outsmarting these radar systems. He was never caught. His cocaine empire grew day by day. Despite the government's every effort, he remained outside the radar's net. The DEA launched a massive manhunt to capture him. Such a big operation that at the time it was considered the DEA's #1 case worldwide. But the real problem was the government was looking for him in the wrong place. He did not operate out of Florida, nor did he look like some flashy smuggler from Miami Vice. In fact, he lived in a small town in Pennsylvania, living there like a completely calm, respectable, ordinary businessman. His name was Rick Little, a man who was close to some of the country's most powerful leaders. A pilot who was considered a genius of aviation, and a mastermind who alone smuggled 10 tons of cocaine into America. And it all began from a single passion. It is said Rick Little had been passionate about flying since childhood. He used to watch planes flying in the sky for hours and then try to understand flight control himself. Before finishing high school, Rick had obtained his pilot's license. Not only flying, he was also exceptionally talented in aircraft mechanics. In the late 1970s, Rick earned a college degree in aeronautics. After that, he started a company in Scranton, Pennsylvania, Air America. This company converted small private planes into luxury flying machines. If you wanted to fly to Canada without refueling, Rick would make your plane capable of non-stop flight. For that, you had to give him $100,000. Air America's reputation grew rapidly. Every mechanic and every client liked Rick. He paid his workers well, gave bonuses, and never did shoddy work. Not only in business, he donated to local charities, befriended police officers. He even took the state governor on official trips in his plane. Rick had made politicians, officers, and the city's leaders his own. Air America was growing fast. But then came 1980, and with it a severe recession. This downturn shook Rick's world of luxury flight. Corporate clients disappeared one by one, and were replaced by people who asked Rick to modify planes, so something could be hidden inside. Just bring a little cargo, they would say. One client could not pay but brought something else instead. A full bag of 3,000 quaaludes. Quaaludes are a sedative and hypnotic drug, whose real name is methaqualone. This drug was originally prescribed to induce sleep and reduce anxiety, but later it became notorious for drug abuse. Rick at that time was struggling financially. He thought, if there is no money, can I sell this? At that moment he remembered an old mechanic of his, who lived in Philadelphia, and that mechanic knew someone who was skilled in such matters. Rick tried selling the pills from that bag for the first time, but fate deceived him that day. The person to whom he sold the pills turned out to be an undercover cop. Rick was immediately arrested, but when the authorities interrogated him, they soon understood. He was not a hardcore drug dealer. He was just a businessman who had fallen into bad financial strait. But the DEA had a suspicion. Was Rick's company Air America being used for smuggling? Because of this suspicion, he was offered a deal. We will drop the charges against you if you give us information about your company's suspicious activities. Rick agreed. Now he officially became an informant, whether he liked it or not. Now he was among the real contacts of the drug business. Gradually Rick realized another truth. Many of his clients themselves were drug smugglers, and they were earning far more money than him. Then came the year. One shady client of Rick offered him a job to become a pilot for a pot smuggling ring in Tampa. Air America was already on the verge of bankruptcy, so Rick said yes. His plan was simple. Earn some money, keep the business afloat, and then get out of this world. But those who hired him were unprofessional themselves. They used drugs and were completely careless. Their flights had no proper planning. Fuel tanks were installed unsafely in the planes, and the chosen routes were full of DEA surveillance. Still, Rick completed his first flight successfully. The plane landed safely, and he received full payment. After that he did 2 more smuggling runs and then left that ring. He thought that would be enough. But now Rick's flying skills and his professionalism had come to the notice of a man whose very name made the police nerve. Jorge Ochoa, a core member of the Medellin cartel. In 1981, an agent of the Medellin cartel summoned Rick to a hidden airstrip built in the jungle. There Rick first met Pablo Escobar and Jorge Ochoa. They shook hands and said, "You bring us the goods and we will make you rich, but there will be no deceit." There in the jungle, Escobar rebuilt an old runway just for trusted pilots like Rick. This was the same cartel that controlled the cocaine market in America. Jorge was among the select few who held the keys to the entire cocaine supply chain. If you worked for Jorge Ochoa, you could go no higher. Ochoa tempted Rick with millions of dollars, adventure, luxury, thrill, everything. Rick, who was still struggling for money, could not refuse the offer. But Ochoa left a stern warning before leaving. "If you betray us, you will be killed." Rick knew this was no small matter now. He was in the real game. Now Rick faced the biggest challenge, a 6,000-mile round trip from Pennsylvania to Colombia, without appearing on radar and without stopping anywhere. Because if he landed at any random place, the authorities could be alert. But only large cargo planes could fly such a long distance non-stop, and those were already on the government's watch list. As soon as a big plane appeared on radar, authorities became suspicious and eventually it would be caught. Rick needed an aircraft that looked completely normal, but was a super smuggler machine inside. He chose a Cessna 310, a small plane that normally could fly only about 900 miles. Rick completely rebuilt its structure. His first step was to increase the fuel capacity. Where a plane could hold 2,000 gallons of fuel, Rick made it capable of carrying 6,000 gallons. But the challenge didn't end there. Authorities were now catching planes whose cabins showed visible fuel tanks, or whose external plumbing looked suspicious. Rick found a solution for that too. He hid fuel inside rubber bladders, some in the nose section, some under the cabin, some in luggage compartments, and the rest in empty spaces inside the wings. Now his small Cessna had become a flying fuel tank, but hiding fuel wasn't enough. The question was how to manage all that extra fuel. Rick created a central fuel distribution system for this. This system sent fuel evenly to the engines, and also maintained the aircraft's balance. But when you add so much extra fuel, the plane's weight increases many times over. If you added that much fuel, you would have to reinforce the wings, strengthen the wheel struts, and increase engine power. Rick installed high horsepower new engines in the plane. engines so powerful that an onlooker would think this little plane could never reach Colombia. But Rick was not only a mechanical genius, he also understood legal loopholes. He got a certificate made from the FAA that stated all the plane's modifications were legal. Now the authorities had no reason to ground Rick's plane. Rick also installed a custom radar system in the cockpit. This system not only monitored weather, but could also detect movements of government air patrols. Rick was not only a genius at preparing planes, he was a master at outsmarting radar systems and DEA surveillance. After that, Rick targeted a corrupt customs officer. That officer sold him information, the complete list of radar system locations, the scheduled details of coastal patrol aircraft, and all the flight paths that were safest. Rick built his own radio network across 2 continents from America to Colombia. He also prepared a secret code system to stay in contact with the cartel on every flight. This was not the work of an armed smuggler. It was a military-level operation. He was extremely sharp. Everything was very well thought out. Every step was planned in advance. Rick was so careful during this period that even the DEA team that had made him an informant did not suspect him. The agents had come very close to him, perhaps because Rick was clever and had presented himself as completely trustworthy. After 3 months of meticulous planning, Rick was finally ready for his first cartel flight. He flew straight to Colombia. 13 hours later, his plane landed there safely. The Colombian smugglers loaded his plane to the... Rick had calculated everything himself, the total plane weight, runway length, and the exact takeoff conditions. But there was one big problem. The fields from which he had to take off were raw and unpaved, and at the end of the runway was a whole line of trees. After a little rest, Rick sat in the cockpit. Now his small plane was about to fly with 800 pounds of cocaine, and this plane was 2,000 pounds over its recommended weight limit. Flying was difficult, and clearing those trees was even more difficult. Along Colombia's coasts, many crash plane wrecks still lie today of those that could not make that takeoff. But Rick's plane, with its high-powered engines and reinforced structure, rose and flew into the sky. Rick never returned via the same. He chose a path the authorities had never considered. If he could make his plane long-range capable via the 73rd meridian, then he could fly outside radar coverage. This route was so unusual that most surveillance systems were not even programmed in that direction. But about 5 hours into the flight, Rick's custom-built detection system alerted him. A Navy surveillance plane was following him. Rick immediately used his weather radar and detected a nearby electrical storm. Now he had only 2 options: be caught by Navy surveillance, or try to pass through that storm. When radar is tracking you and you know that if caught you face a lifetime in prison, perhaps flying into a storm seems better. Rick pushed the throttle and went straight into that lightning storm. The turbulence, the flashing lightning. Rick stayed steady, crafty, and sharp. At that time, smugglers used a technique called wave hopping. In it, the pilot would fly just 100 to 200 feet above the sea surface so that radar could not detect it. Rick flew in that mode too, skimming just above the waves as if lost between sea and sky in the lips of the clouds. He was not just a good pilot. He was perhaps one of the most dangerous drug smuggling pilots in the world. And as Rick expected, the Navy's surveillance plane it broke off the chase. About 2 hours later, Rick emerged from the storm. Now he was flying at an extremely low altitude, directly under radar. He targeted an old, closed, decommissioned computer landing strip. But as the runway approached, Rick made a strange... He suddenly pulled his plane up, straight to 10,500 feet. Why? Because Rick wanted for the first time to appear deliberately on radar, but to appear as if he were some regular domestic flight. He would avoid radar at low altitude, and then climb to present himself as a legit plane. He then contacted the Scranton control tower and reported himself as Commuter Hawk. The plane landed quietly. Rick completed the 800-pound cocaine deal without a fuss, and earned more than 1,000. The Medellin cartel was so pleased with Rick that they put him on regular flights. Every flight involved millions of dollars, huge thrills, and was planned like a high-level operation. Rick now became the cartel's most trusted smuggler. For him, it wasn't just about money anymore. It was an adventure, and that money gave him the freedom to live that adventure. Now Rick took one more step ahead. He started hiring other pilots. Extra pilots were brought in. The cartel's flights had now turned into a multi-level operation. Rick was proud of the efficiency of his operation. He jokingly called himself the Federal Express of cocaine. He would say, "Anywhere in the world, whatever time you tell me, I'll reach there." not more than 3 minutes early or late. The first 4 flights were executed so perfectly that when it came to the 5th flight, the Colombians themselves told Rick, "Wait a little, we don't even have any product left." The schedule was so tight that even Rick started getting exhausted. But not a single flight was ever late, and no crash ever happened. The goods always arrived on time. Seeing Rick's work, the Colombians were so pleased that they even gave him a racehorse as a gift. By that time, the DEA had no suspicion on Rick. In fact, they used to ask him about the inside details of drug smuggling, and Rick would tell them, but very cleverly. He only revealed the kind of information that didn't harm the cartel, but actually benefited it. The DEA kept thinking Rick was helping them, while in reality, he was working for the cartel. Then came the year 1984, and Rick's old life came back to confront him again. The Tampa smuggling ring, from which Rick had started his smuggling career, was now completely destroyed. In this case, charges were filed against Rick and 15 other people, and he was summoned to Florida for trial. Now Rick played his old trick again. He manipulated the old DEA officers and convinced them that he was just a misguided man who had now changed for the better. Some DEA agents went so far that they even testified in his favor in court, while others wrote letters praising his good character. But what Rick really feared were the Colombians. He was afraid they might suspect that he was going to reveal their name. That's why, even during the court trial, Rick didn't stop flying cocaine. Every weekend when the court was closed, Rick would leave his lawyers behind and fly to Colombia that very night. He would drop off 200 to 300 kilos of cocaine for the cartel, sleep a few hours, and return to Florida by Sunday night. On Monday morning, he would again be present in the courtroom, as if nothing had happened. The trial went on for 11 weeks, and in those 11 weeks, Rick completed 11 cocaine runs, earning a total of $13 million. The most shocking part, Rick was the only one whom the jury declared not guilty. Now Rick had millions of dollars, but the real challenge was to clean it, to launder it. For this, he chose an ambitious banker from Scotland, Michael Coffey. Michael hid Rick's money in offshore accounts without any proper documentation. He earned a good commission from it, and also felt the thrill of being part of Rick's network. Rick's empire began to face danger when one of his pilots, Jim, made a huge mistake. Jim crashed his plane on top of the very man's car to whom he was supposed to deliver the drugs. Everyone said Jim crashed his plane onto that car, but Jim claimed, "That man parked his car right under my plane." Jim had been taking cocaine all day and was completely out of control. The result, one man died, and a felony murder case was filed against Jim. Jim's first phone call went to Rick Little. Jim said that Rick could have given him some money and told him to disappear somewhere, spend 9 months on a beach and lay low. But Rick didn't do that. Jim Cooper was terrified of getting 20 years in prison, so he made a plea deal through which he saved himself from jail, but gave the DEA all the information about Rick. Rick could have done something for him, given him some money, helped him disappear, but he didn't, and in return Jim sold him out. After Jim Cooper's testimony, the DEA started taking direct action against Rick and his company Air America. Investigators began checking where Rick's planes were landing, where he was buying radio equipment from, and in which states his money was circulating. At the same time, the DEA also brought a money laundering expert onto the team, who started tracing all of Rick's bank transactions. Rick now clearly understood that the noose was tightening around him. He immediately wired $30 million to an offshore account on a Caribbean island called Eustatius, and fled there himself. Such islands often have no extradition treaty with the US, meaning it wasn't easy to capture someone there. But the DEA did not underestimate Rick. Forensic accountants traced his money trail. The DEA sent an official request to the local authorities of the island, proving that Rick was a wanted criminal in America. The authorities then declared him an undesirable alien and decided to deport him. The year was 1986. Rick was arrested by the local police on the island. He was taken straight to the airport. He sat inside the plane, and as soon as the plane entered US airspace, DEA agents told him, "Now you are officially under arrest." Rick was charged with cocaine smuggling conspiracy. If he had stayed silent, he could have faced up to 3. But now for the first time, Rick had broken down. He fully cooperated in the investigation. But in the courtroom, things didn't go as he had planned. One day, the government lawyer played an audio tape. On that tape, Rick could be heard alerting the cartel about an upcoming raid. The entire courtroom was stunned. The judge said, Mr. Little was playing both sides. Rick now understood himself. His double game could no longer continue. He revealed where he had hidden the money, and the authorities seized over $21 million in cash and assets. Rick also exposed his entire network, and his whole team was sent to jail. Rick himself was sentenced to 8 years and 6 months in prison. He was a man who was like Christopher Columbus, an explorer, and like Charles Lindbergh, a fearless pilot. Rick was never afraid to learn anything new, and he never backed away from taking risks. In the drug trade, perhaps there was no genius like him. But being a genius doesn't mean there were no consequences. Cocaine meant destroying millions of lives. Children, families, society, everyone was affected. After coming out of prison, Rick started a new life again. He now lives in an area of Florida called Smuggler's Cove, a very symbolic and ironic name. Rick Little, a man who gained everything and lost everything. Many people believe Rick still has millions of dollars hidden somewhere. Some say he even worked for the CIA. That's why he survived for so long. Others believe he didn't betray the cartel. He just saved himself. Even today, people in Smuggler's Cove see him, silent and unknown. A man who conquered the skies but lost to the ground. If this case shocked you, make sure to give a like. What do you think about Rick Little? Tell us in the comments below. And for more such true and shocking crime stories, subscribe to our channel.